You can go ahead and start the meeting. David, could you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. Let me get this agenda up. Apologies. Huh. If we could start with the meeting minutes instructions. Roll call of members.
Yes, so the meeting actually is going to proceed via teleconference in accordance with Government Code Section 54953E2 in order to protect the health and safety of staff, officials, and the general public. Let me go ahead and do roll call for the members.
Here.
Vice Chair Hernandez. Vice Chair Hernandez.
Present.
Director Josie.
Here.
Director Kick is absent. Director Narum.
Present.
Director Bonanno also is absent. Chair Halbert.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. If we could move to the next item, which is meeting open to the public. Members of the public who wish to speak, please raise your hand and be recognized for 3 minutes. Are there any members of the public?
So we don't have any attendees in this meeting, and I did see public comments via email.
All right, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Any items to be pulled or discussed? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar, item 4.
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Second, no written comments presented. I'll take a roll call, please.
Director Bonanno is absent. Director Brown.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hernandez.
Yes.
Director Josie.
Yes.
Director Kick is absent. Director Narum.
Yes.
Chair Hubbard.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Then item 5, long range plan.
Okay, I'll start this off and hand it off. Today, we have with us Thomas Whitman and Peter Soderberg. They are with the consulting firm of Nelson Nygaard, the same firm that did our short-range transit plan and the COA back in 2016 or so. So they're here today to kick off the long-range transit plan board input session. And I'll hand it off to Thomas Whitman to take it from here.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Thomas Whitman with Nelson Nygaard. We're, one of my colleagues and I, Peter Soderberg, are going to be walking through, a couple of different things, a little discussion about the long-range transit plan and some of the things we intend to do with that. And then also go through a series of exercises, that, help us understand your vision, as well as where you stand on some of the trade-offs associated and some of the tensions that are inherently present in transit planning. So we've got a couple of different things, a couple of different educational items to help folks understand some of the things that we'll be looking at as a part of this, and then go through a series of interactive exercises using Menti to help us understand some of the things, some of your priorities. So I want to start off with introducing Peter Soderberg, one of my colleagues, and he'll walk through the some of the long-range transit plan tasks.
All right, hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having us here today. So like Thomas mentioned, I'm going to start by walking through some of the specific tasks and real elements of this long-range transit plan that we're going to be focusing on over the next few months. So first and foremost, as a part of the long-range plan, we really want to establish what the long-range vision for the agency is, really building off of our findings and the outcomes from the short-range plan, but with longer-term improvements and investments in mind. Part of the goal of this is to really have meaningful board, stakeholder, and community engagement throughout the process so that we can both find and articulate shared goals and values, really ensuring that any recommendations coming out of this plan are in line with what the priorities and the needs are for the community, as well as for those key stakeholders and representatives from the board. A big component of this is creating transparency in that decision-making process so that once these recommendations are developed and we do have that vision, everyone feels like they have a buy-in into that vision for the agency and the future of the region. So one of the first pieces that we'll begin by looking at here is an update to the existing conditions evaluation that really came out of the short-range plan. As some of you may know, the short-range planning effort started before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, so there's been a lot of changes on the ground in the time since that started. And we really want to make sure that we have an up-to-date understanding of what the demographics look like in the Tri-Valley area, what population density and employment density look like, and how those things have changed in the past few years. We'll also be looking at travel demand and travel patterns throughout the region, both looking at current trends and how people are traveling within the Tri-Valley now, as well as how those trends have changed during the pandemic, how those travel patterns have evolved, and how we can make sure that our future investments align with what we're seeing in terms of these changing travel patterns. We'll also be reviewing any updates and changes in ridership and productivity on the LAVTA system, just to better understand how the role of transit has changed in the region and what role that's likely to play moving forward. Next, as I mentioned before, we want to make sure that this vision is really guided by community priorities, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to weigh in, make their priorities known, and make sure that they have an opportunity to review what this vision looks like and have their voice heard. So we'll be using a series of opportunities throughout the process, including public meetings so that people can tune in, let us know what they think about our process, as well as what that vision looks like. Ongoing engagement with both the board as well as key stakeholders in the region so we can find out what their needs and priorities are and what your vision looks like for the future. And finally, recognizing that not everyone has the time or interest to tune into a specific public meeting, but may be willing to take a brief online survey to let us know what their priorities are, what they need out of their transit system in the long term, and what they think of any potential vision we have for the future. So being able to incorporate all of these goals into one cohesive outreach plan. Next, once we have some of those initial demographic findings, as well as some of that feedback from the community, we'll begin developing some initial strategies that really align with a few different areas. What we do is really view this as different pieces to a puzzle that could be put together in a series of ways, and recognizing that there's really no right or wrong way to provide this kind of transit service, but looking at how there's different trade-offs and where those trade-offs align in terms of these community values. So we'll look at things like how different types of transit service could be provided, different ways it could be provided in terms of a grid or a radial system, things like that on a more technical level, as well as some different trade-offs in how service is provided that Thomas will discuss in more detail later in this presentation, but recognizing that there are specific trade-offs and different ways of providing service and identifying how this can be leveraged to best meet the needs of the community. There's also some external factors, which LAVTA has explored in the past in terms of partnerships with transportation network companies like Lyft and Uber, autonomous vehicles, and things outside of the agency's control like development patterns. So being able to recognize that there are these external factors and seeing what role they can play in the future of transit service for the region. And finally, once we have those initial strategies developed, we'll work on developing final recommendations that, again, both reflect that technical analysis and community input that went into the process. They'll be based on best practices from the industry, as well as guiding principles to ensure that they align with both the board's priorities as well as the community's needs. And finally, ensuring that these goals are realistic, collaborative, and implementable, making sure that we know there's some inherent uncertainty in the future as we move through this pandemic recovery, and ensuring that any recommendations coming out of this process will be implementable and feasible for a variety of funding levels. And with that, I'll turn it over to Thomas to go through our first interactive activity.
All right. One of the things, that we'd like to do is, two different pieces here. First of all, getting y'all to, to use Menti for the first time. That's on the next slide. But also want to give you a little thought and brain exercise right here. It's like fast forward 10 years from now. So long range transit plan, a newspaper or a blog, whatever we want to call it, just released a headline about LAVTA service. What is it in that headline from a vision perspective that you can affect today that you'd like to see in that headline? What is that vision that we want to be working toward from here, so that 10 years from now, this headline would be able to say something like that. So, we're going to be looking at, sharing this, and if we can go to, for those of you, I guess it's a remote meeting, all of you are sitting in front of a computer, open a new tab and go to menti.com and enter the 8-digit code 4881-1850. And it should bring you to the first question right here, which is, what is the newspaper vision that you'd like to see? So I'm going to put that up on screen. I want to ask you to share what that is. Write it down. It doesn't have to be long, but then take a look and see what some of the shared visions are, or what some of the individual visions are, and let's see what the folks, where they see the agency 10 years from now. What is it that is something that we could really look at? So here's an example. We've had board member Bonanno answered this 2 days ago. We went this through her, so went through this with her. So here's an example of what a newspaper headline might look like. And again, if we go to menti.com and use the code 4881-1850, hopefully this will show up and you'll be able to add to that.
I'm sorry, are we supposed to do that right now or just listen?
Right now.
Okay.
I apologize for not being clear about that.
So would
That's good.
board
Just
members
so
raise
we
their
know.
hand? Wishing to speak? Could you repeat the instructions? I'm sorry.
Could we, go to menti.com and use code 4881-1850, and this question that's on your screen should show up, and it should ask you to take a look at that, to write down what is the headline that you would see in the newspaper 10 years from now about your vision for LAVTA. And then we'll, after everybody's had a chance to write this down, I figure we'll talk, each one of you have the opportunity to share what your thoughts are specifically on that. Like everybody's head is down, working hard. LAVTA achieves 15-minute interval service to all neighborhoods in the Tri-Valley. It's an ambitious goal. I love the vision for that. I think one of the Director Bonanno, two visions. She actually had two headlines to be fare free in the future, as well as 100% emission free. So another very ambitious vision for the future. Very similar. The LAVTA is the first to use green hydrogen fleet and the first to use SAV. That's the autonomous vehicle fleet. I think you're one of the leaders in taking a look at autonomous vehicles right now. Increase ridership with high household penetration. I'm going to ask a follow-up. It's like ask a follow-on question. When let's give a chance to, for a couple other folks to share what their headline is. But the follow-up question is going to be increased ridership with how high household penetration. If you can just explain what you meant by the high household penetration. I think I know what you mean, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Ridership record.
I would say that a high percentage of households use a bus. Everyone uses a bus. 100% penetration. All families use a bus at some point.
Great. That's what I thought you meant, but I just again wanted to make sure that that was the appropriate interpretation. So, multiple people saying things about zero emissions, as the future vision for service. Are there any other, I just want to make sure, how many numbers are we waiting for? Is it just 4 directors on this call? Or is there a 5th or a 6th?
I submitted mine and I'm not sure, I have not heard you read it yet.
So what you're saying, you submitted it and you don't see it, or?
Correct.
Correct. Why don't you share verbally what that might be?
Sure. We probably should have done that to begin with.
Yeah.
No, my headline would have been LAVTA, a reliable bus that will get you from place to place.
One of the things I look at, some of the, if does anybody else want to, take a brief moment and, talk a little bit about what the thought process was behind what your headline vision was? Don't everybody speak at once.
I raised my hand, but
Oh,
yeah.
I can't see hand raises because I'm sharing the screen. So that's
David can. So this is Carla Brown from Pleasanton. And so one of the things I have been a strong proponent for my entire 10 years on LAVTA has been increasing ridership, because then it becomes buses that are circulating down our street that are actually helping people instead of virtually empty buses. So I know we're doing great with school trippers, but it's as Melissa Hernandez said, getting people from place to place and getting actual real ridership, that we become a successful part of the community's transportation. And then I also added investments in 2023 payoff with increased ridership. I'm not sure what those will be, so I'm hoping you can help us with that. And then absolutely zero emissions, improve regional air quality. So those were my 3 points. I really would like to see ridership. The buses are taking the same route, whether they have 5 people or 50 people. So let's get butts in seats. Thanks.
right. I am scrolling through folks right now, and I believe Director Josie.
Yeah, I'm the one that put LAVTA achieves 15-minute interval service to all neighborhoods in the Tri-Valley, which I don't actually expect us to be at in 10 years from now. Very aspirational, in fact, but it speaks to Carla's point that, it increases ridership. People don't ride the bus unless it's convenient to them. There are certain areas of the Tri-Valley that we're really not serving well at all. I mean, we serve them for day tripper, particularly in Dublin. We serve the school trip routes, but really people in those neighborhoods don't take the bus any other time, because the buses just aren't on a convenient schedule. You have to check the schedule. It might be 2 hours for the next bus. Ridership can either spiral up because it's convenient, or it can spiral down because it's not convenient. And so I'd like to see, us have people take the bus because they don't have to think about taking the bus, because the bus is just there and reliable and gets them where they want to go.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? And I'm trying to scroll through. I got a very small screen right here. Would like to share what their thoughts are on that. And if not, I'll continue on to the next section of the presentation. But anybody else want to speak up and share their thoughts on this?
Well, I will. So I have the green hydrogen just because we're kind of headed that way anyway, with feasibilities and land purchases to set up a plant and so forth. And then I'd like to see at least partial use of semi-autonomous vehicles, because in theory we would save money. We could have then more buses to get to the point of, being even more convenient and getting, as I think was said, butts in the seats, which is the ultimate objective, I think.
Great, thank you. I think one of the things that strikes me is the focus on ridership and also the embrace of new technology here. And it's one of the things that for newer board members, it's been one of the things that I've always found very impressive about you as an agency, is the willingness to, I guess the best way is to take risks, or be the first. You were one of the first with a partnership with Uber and Lyft. You were one of the first with testing out an autonomous vehicle on public streets. So it's quite frankly, it's cool to see that that looking forward, that same being willing to take a chance on something that might not be as proven is really, really cool to see. So I just figured I'd throw that in as a anecdotal observation with this, but I do think it's very interesting. So let me try to see how the switch back to presentation goes. There we go. It actually worked. And let's talk a little bit about considerations in transit planning. And this is really to try to get an introduction. It's our understanding that some of the directors are a little bit newer, and we just wanted to give an overview of some of the things that, what makes transit a success. And what are some of the things that the agency can control, and what are some of the things that are beyond the agency's control? And if we think about it, like a series of things go into the success of how many people use the service, how many people ride the service, and what it might look like. And it includes everything from density and the types of land uses that are there. There's certain types of land uses that are going to generate or have the potential to generate more ridership than very low density single family homes or an empty field with just scrub grass growing on it. It also means that we take a look at what is the built environment. It's not just what type of development is out there, but is there sidewalk? Is there a convenient way to get across the street? Is there, is there a safe places for people to walk to and from services? It also comes into play, what are the community goals and needs? I mean, if are there ways for service that's out there to move through congestion, such as the HOV lanes or priority treatments at signals? How does each municipality within the region, how do they promote service? And it's a key element in success that many larger municipalities and some smaller municipalities are really trying to see and take steps toward saying our goals, our regional goals, take that step towards supporting transit and transit ridership. It also includes best practices. High frequency, which is one of the things that several of you mentioned is part of your vision, is part of that best practice. But at the same time, we also need to be well aware that there's always budget constraints that are associated with this. So trying to do the most that we can within the budget that we have is one of the key elements that we always take a look at, and when it comes to understanding what works. I mentioned density as one of the key things here, and density is one of the key elements, whether or not transit is going to be successful. It's gonna, when we say be successful, is carry a lot of people. And in essence, it's like sort of like a circular thing. You need to have certain types of density, to achieve higher ridership. At the same time, you need to have high quality service, and you do have certain high quality service corridors with routes 10 and routes 30 that help support that land use. And in an ideal world, that higher level of density as growth occurs, supports, and creates ridership from the transit agency, which causes the agency to increase service, to have more corridors that operate every 15 minutes, for instance, and that creates an additional push or creates more foot traffic, and creates the impetus for more development or different types of development, and it creates a virtual circle so that a region can grow, transit ridership can grow, and that the supporting land uses come into play. Some of the things that help make this happen are like a frequent transit service that comes every 15 minutes or more, and also recognizing that not everybody is going to be able to live based on the development patterns, is not going to be able to live on a corridor, on a route that comes every 15 minutes, but recognize there has to be other ways to get folks to major destinations or to the overall route network, or in the Tri-Valley's case, to BART. And one of the other tools to make sure that this virtuous cycle does happen is to begin looking at transit priority in the roadways. How can buses, how can vans, how can vehicles get to their destinations faster and provide a reliable way for folks to get to their destinations? The other thing that when we think about what are some of the transit supportive factors, that we call them the 7 Ds, but really it has to do with density. It has to do with the diversity of land uses. If it's all residential, it's not going to generate as much ridership as a mix of uses that includes housing, it includes commercial areas, includes shopping, includes medical land uses, and it includes educational land uses. It incorporates from a built infrastructure perspective. Are there sidewalks? Are there ways to get to and from a destination? Is it accessible for all riders? And what does that development pattern look like? If there's large setbacks, if a store is a quarter mile through a parking lot, it's going to be a lot less attractive for a potential user to have to walk through that parking lot than it is to have that front door in the near vicinity of a transit stop. I think one of the other interesting things when we hear the word density, it's often perceived as a negative word, but at the same time, density, creates, because there's usually with density comes a mix of land uses associated with that, is that there's denser neighborhoods tend to generate fewer automobile trips. It doesn't mean that everybody's taking transit, for this, but it means that certain trip types that would typically require a vehicle would, are able to take place via walking, biking, or via transit. And so again, this is something to keep in mind as we think about like what makes transit a success. Density is a key to this, and it plays a key part in reducing vehicular traffic as denser neighborhoods are developed. Some of the other things that influence whether or not somebody might want to take transit or not includes, do you have a vehicle at home? Are you, where in your income level are you? The closer you are to poverty levels, the more likely you might be to use transit. Renters are more likely to use transit, as well as young adults. Seniors are more likely to use ADA or complementary paratransit service, the flexible service that provide door-to-door service. They're not as likely to use fixed route services, the 35 or 40-foot buses that are traveling through the area. So we have to recognize that when we look at what are some of the needs throughout the area, that what seniors want and need may be very different than what some of the other population segments need in order to provide mobility. I think one of the other things over the past 2 years that's become very clear is that equity has become a big buzzword, and certainly transit provides an equitable mobility solution for a large segment of our population. Not only can it reduce, improve roadway capacity and reduce emissions, but it provides a lower cost way of providing transportation. As data shows that, on average, the average cost of owning a car, when you throw everything and all costs of ownership in there, costs close to $10,000 versus on average, that same mobility pass on transit costs significantly less associated with this. And it's really, this is why transit is such a lifeline for folks with disabilities, for older folks, and people that don't have vehicles. So in the end, like, where do we want to go? And I think back to some of the vision statements that you put together. It's like, what is it? How do we get 100% usage of our system? We create, we come as close as possible to the ideal transit service where service is direct. It serves a variety of destinations, has frequent schedules that are easy to remember. We have the technology that's there to help give us information in terms of where and when the next bus is coming. The waiting areas are nicely designed and safe for folks. It's well integrated with our other transportation investments. And there's a way to get get through traffic and congestion in a reliable and fast way. So these are all things that when we think about where could we go in the future, it's not just what things that LAVTA can control, but you can see many of the things on the screen are things that municipalities control, the DOTs control. And so it requires ultimately a partnership to move forward with this. I want to, talk, one other element with this is like when we think about how do we get people to use service and what are some of the elements that drive people to make that choice? And that one of the key things here that we want to consider is that different individuals have different decision-making processes. Somebody that wants to, for whom time is valuable is going to, different things are going to attract them to use transit than somebody who says, I just want to get the cheapest rides from point A to point B. So there's a series of things that from a market segmentation perspective, the folks that value time are not going to necessarily, the same things are, that are important for them are not going to attract somebody for whom money is the most important thing. Or, and if we look at whether it's where folks need to go, when they need to go, how fast they need to go, or how much it costs, there's different things will attract them to service. But there is one constant that I want to make sure that market research consistently shows that reliable service doesn't need to be fast, but we need to, if you can count on it to be there and take the same amount of time on a day in, day out basis, that is something important across market segments. And again, this calls into play, calls into the question in the long term, how can we start looking at ensuring that our service, LAVTA service, is reliable in the long run? I give this presentation, or this types of presentation in places all across the country, and there's very few places that I can point to that I have actually done two of these emerging mobility efforts. But I think the other thing is we look at a long-range vision for transit, and I'm so glad that somebody mentioned this in terms of what their headline might be. It's not just where does a 40-foot bus go, but what are other options that can provide mobility in an area that has a diverse series of land uses, such as the Tri-Valley does. And this includes partnerships with TNCs, it includes autonomous shuttles, and it also includes microtransit, which is in essence an agency operated flexible vehicle that uses an app or phone call to get a ride to or from someplace. So the long range transit plan is not only going to be looking at where does a bus go, but also focus on some of these different elements as well. So with that, before I move on, are there any questions? I just covered a lot of like high level introductory. Here's some of the things that are important from a transit planning perspective. Are there any questions before we move on to a transit planning trade-off exercise?
I see Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, thank you. Thomas, thank you for sort of the big picture. But as I recall, when we did long range transportation discussions here at LAVTA previously, we looked at that interconnectivity between BART, and that was something that this board or other previous members of this board put a lot of emphasis in that connectivity. Somebody rides BART into Pleasanton, Dublin, and they need a way to get to work or a way to get home or something. And that was a great way to pick up a rider. And as long as we coordinated with BART, for example, now we know BART ridership is down. And since that was a cornerstone of many of our riders, I wondered if you had any inside information about when will BART ridership pick up again. I see traffic on the freeways picking up, but BART ridership, especially those parking areas, are still very empty. So that's one. And my second question is, we focused a lot and invested significantly in autonomous vehicles. When do you expect that to take off? Or are we just an R&D test center? Thanks.
Okay, let me try to take each one of those. The first piece is BART ridership. The Bay Area is the slowest area in the country, to my knowledge, to recover its downtown employment, concentration. And BART has, and we see that as a reflection of what BART ridership is looking at. That being said, I do, I think the last time it did a presentation, we said, okay, don't expect, BART ridership to be back to 50% in like 1 or 2 years. And here we are 1 or 2 years later. And I believe BART is, and I don't know today's number off the top of my head, but it is not that far from 50% of what it was before. And it might be 60% now, but
It's 40, Thomas.
40.
Yeah, it's 40.
There was just an article in yesterday's paper. It's 40%.
It's
Okay.
terrible. It's terrible. Mhm.
And so, that's the regional, the work from home pattern that many people have right now. I mean, quite frankly, I think most of us are sitting at home, or many of us are at least right now, and you're a perfect example of this. Is going to limit some of the return to work. That being said, if I look across the country in terms of what some of the trends are, I do expect things to come back. Will it look like 2019? Absolutely not. Do I expect to see a slow return and regrowth of traffic on BART? When I said, pardon me, of ridership on BART, I shouldn't use the term traffic. I do believe that. And some of the factors that are associated with that include, as congestion regrows and it becomes harder and harder to get from point A to point B in an expeditious manner, BART again is going to look at an option as a more viable option. I think people are also, and I sit in one of these areas too, where the reticence to use transit because you're scared you're going to die of COVID, I think that is slowly going away. It's gone away in most of the rest of the country. So I do think that's a secondary factor, but I think it's really one of the drivers of BART ridership being so far down is simply that folks got used to working at home and are saying, why should I spend an hour and a half commuting each direction when I can be as productive at home? And what I think is going to happen is that we're going to see Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays get closer to, and as I did not say close, not equal to, but closer to what 2019 ridership was eventually.
Mhm.
But I don't see a 5-day-a-week work day where things are super crowded 5 days a week anymore.
Okay, well, I'll just counterpoint if I may. So thank you. I do understand the slow building back, but I was at an event last night and a gentleman said, I used to ride BART all the time to the city. I don't anymore because it's dirty. I saw a guy shoot up right next to me, and there's just not a pride of this is a safe place to be anymore. And maybe that's just a handful of people I've talked to. It was 4 or 5, but there's some concerns that BART needs to invest in their own safety and security so that people feel safe, and it's not even COVID. Because people are going to large theaters, they're doing big events. It's not COVID. I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree with you on that. There is more factors that maybe BART needs to address. It's certainly not our challenge, but we partnered with BART in this last go around, and with BART suffering, I think that's part of our suffering and ridership, of course. Thanks.
One of your primary markets has traditionally been that service to BART, and with BART being so far down, it means that partnership and that feeder service those numbers are way down as well. And it's I don't want to say an existential challenge, but it is a big challenge. I mean, it's a large part of your ridership base went away, and so the question is, what is your other ridership base, and what are some of the other things that can help attract folks to come back?
Okay. And thank you. And autonomous vehicles, is that going to take off, or is that an investment that's very interesting?
I don't, the honest answer is I don't know. I would love for it to take off because it solves a lot of challenges. I mean, it's a lot easier. I mean, on the one hand, the promise is, we don't have to have somebody in the vehicle. On the other hand, the very issue that you just brought up of somebody shooting up in the vehicle or hanging out in the vehicle, a homeless person hanging out in the vehicle, the people that have tried this and from a demonstration project perspective are often saying, we need to have somebody security in the vehicle to ensure that bad behavior doesn't happen. And so if I think about the challenges that transit agencies having attracting operators, this is a way to get around that. It's a lot easier to find security personnel than it is somebody with a CDL. And so I'd like to think that it's going to become more prevalent, but do I think it's going to be a mature technology within the next 5 years? No, I do not.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else with questions? Seeing none, I guess, is this the end of the presentation?
Got one other quick thing. It's like, it's a series of trade-off questions to talk about the values of the agency, and I can walk through this real quick. But ultimately, we want to ask a series of trade-off questions like, what's more important for you, and and just do again, this is sort of like what's important from a transit perspective, from frequency. It's like, why is frequency important? It causes people to wait less, travel more conveniently, make better connections, and know that if you missed your bus, that there's another one coming. From benefits of span of service, we know that the job market has fundamentally changed, and COVID has made this even more evident. That 9 to 5 is no longer the normal work times. Everybody works whenever they can or whenever they want to, but service workers in particular are held to a different schedule, and it never was 9 to 5 for them, most of them. And so non-peak time service levels are super important, for a large part of our market. And more trip types can be served with later or earlier service. One of the things that's also become more evident is a need to focus on 7 days a week rather than just on weekdays. And it was like peaks were always on weekdays. That was when the congestion was. We have the most workforce moving during those times. But at the same time, service industry jobs are 7 days a week. And if you don't have a car, 7 day a week service, is super important to provide mobility. On the other hand, we want to recognize too that weekend service does not carry, and no system that I know of, maybe Vegas might be an exception, but does not carry as many folks as they do on a weekday. One of the other elements is transfers. If we think about where some of the origin destinations are within the Tri-Valley, it's serving each one of those origin destinations with a one-seat ride is very, very difficult. And it's like, and we're going to ask, and we do ask our customers to transfer right now. And we need to recognize that folks dislike transfers, but transfers can be mitigated by 15-minute service or more frequent service. And if we ask folks to transfer, it typically means we can invest more in frequency in certain corridors and don't duplicate one another. I think one of the other things that we want to talk about in terms of a long-range vision and trade-offs is directness of service. The more direct the service is, the faster travel times can be, and the more likely folks will use the service. On the other hand, there's certain folks that say, I want to have front door access to a hospital, to a senior home, to a school. You need to provide me a shorter walking distance. And what that means is it's longer, slower travel times on the bus routes and higher operating costs. So again, there's an inherent trade-off associated with that. Likewise, there's an impact on bus stop spacing and how fast service can be. Local bus stops are typically between 1/8 and 1/4 mile. And as we get higher levels of bus service, whether it's enhanced bus or bus plus or bus rapid transit, it means bus stop spacing gets to be more than 1/4 mile so that the buses can travel faster, yet we're asking folks to walk further in order to get there. And so one of the inherent trade-offs is it okay to ask people to walk further to service so that our bus speeds can actually be more competitive with driving? And last, one of the other trade-offs that we'll want to take a look at is, are there, there's a demand for local service and, providing, quality service to all residents within the Tri-Valley. But one of the other things in previous planning studies and, is also providing commuter services, that take us to job centers outside of the Tri-Valley. And, so the local services, serve trips that have origins and destinations within the Tri-Valley that tend to have higher ridership and have lower operating costs. But commuter services can take vehicles off the road. They provide more congestion relief, but it has higher operating costs. And overall, from a bang for the buck of how much ridership you're getting for the service that you're putting out there, it's higher cost as well. And typically you also need a park and ride that goes with that. So I want to walk through using that as a high level introduction. Again, going back to the Menti, we've got a couple of questions for you in terms of, how do you feel about some of the trade-offs associated with this? So it's like 6 more questions. And I'll throw it up on screen right here. It's like, how should LAVTA approach service and span? Should we provide more frequent service? Let's say, we're looking into the future, we have a limited budget. Should we invest that in providing more frequent service, but for a shorter amount of time? Or should we look at less frequent service, but make sure that we can operate earlier or operate later? What's more important? And again, there's no right or wrong answer associated with this. But it's really a question of like, where, as we look at a vision for what the future should be and a prioritization for future service investments, where should we be, where in the range of investment strategies, do we fall as a part of this? And hopefully all of you can, go back to Menti, and it's the same code that you had beforehand. It should have just advanced the slide if you kept that window open. And you can just enter in 1 through 5, where 1 is is a greater emphasis on frequency, and 5 is a greater emphasis on span of service. If you had to choose one versus the other.
Hey, Thomas, just a heads up that we may have board members who can't because they may be driving or away from unable. So you might want to maybe ask for additional verbal thoughts. Just my thought.
If anybody's unable to enter the website, just shout out your answer. If you can safely do so. If not, we'll skip that.
I'll go ahead and answer that question with regards to it really depends on where you're located. And, you know, a lot of folks in the Tri-Valley go to Silicon to go, you know, for work. And so a lot of these businesses supply actual buses for their employees, like Facebook, or they have a location where they meet in the morning. So I think for me, it would be, you know, more frequency to get people from place to place, but it really depends on how much ridership you have.
And I think that's a great illustration of some of the trade-offs, and also an acknowledgement of that you have a park and ride based regional service operating already to Genetec, to Facebook, to Google, to Apple, from the Tri-Valley right now. It's just not on LAVTA vehicles, it's on private vehicles that are crossing the bay. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. Whoops, wrong slide. How should LAVTA approach coverage? Should we provide, you know, again, should we look at expanding to provide, you know, service to more areas? If we, again, this is like if we have a limited amount of resources, or should we, you know, it's provide less service, less frequent service to more areas, you know, basically trying to spread the wealth, or is it to provide more frequent service to fewer areas, like, you know, invest in the areas that we serve right now and do it better than what we're doing right now? This is a tough one too. A lot of middle of the road right here. And again, there is no right or wrong answer right here. And I believe one of the directors is driving. I'm not sure if you would like to verbally chime in.
Yeah, I think for me, it's if you have something that generally needs more help and needs more work on, then it's better to make that close to perfect before you get any bigger. Sometimes getting bigger doesn't mean necessarily making more money. It can cause, in my opinion, a little bit more friction.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and kind of in support of that, if I could, you had said density is important. So running more frequency in dense areas and business parks instead of the sprawl with infrequency. So that sprawling area or span may have low ridership, even if you were coming every 15 minutes. So go to the density areas and do it frequently.
Yeah. Thank you for that explanation of your answer. How should LAVTA approach days of service? You know, it should we provide, you know, again, we have limited amount of resources. Should we look at providing less weekday service and more weekend service? Or should we look at providing more weekday service and or focus a greater focus on weekdays with a less of a focus on weekends? We have our first 5 or a 1 on this question. So somebody feels strongly about this one. So we could wait for one more response. And
it's just going to say it depends on the demand. Sorry, I will respond, but it depends on the demand.
Yes, it does. Again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's a matter of, you know, it's like where, it's sort of like on a spectrum. It's like where on a spectrum do you fall? And to me, it's always fascinating, like depending on where we go, like these answers differ. And so it's cool to see. And I, you know, it's like, is there a verbal response here other than it depends?
No, I agree. It does depend where you're at. I mean, on the weekends, you're going to go get your chores done, right? You're going to go grocery shopping. It's really hard to be able to take your 10 bags of groceries into a bus. And so most people, now that COVID is almost lifted completely, they're going to go away probably to a further destination than they have before. They're most likely, may or may not stay in place for us in the Tri-Valley.
Yeah.
So.
All right, a couple more. From a transfer perspective, right now we ask folks to transfer in downtown Livermore. We ask folks to, at the Dublin BART station, the Dublin Pleasant BART station. How should LAVTA approach transfers? Should we provide more routes with less frequent service but fewer transfers? So like more one-seat rides, but or should we focus on frequency, but because we're trying to serve multiple trip purposes here, to ask folks, we can have more frequent service on certain corridors, but we're going to have to ask folks to transfer to and from their, potentially transfer to or from their final destinations. How do you feel about transfers? Is it more important to get one-seat rides, or is it more important to say, hey, if we provide quality service, we feel like that transfers are acceptable?
To me, that depends greatly on how frequent is frequent.
It's if it's every 60 minutes, I know how most people would answer, but if it was 30 or 15 minutes, the answer might be different, for instance.
Well, even between 30 and 15 minutes, the answer might be different, right? I mean, if we're asking people to transfer twice and both transfer times are 20 to 30 minutes, that's probably enough to keep somebody from riding the bus or LAVTA, whatever. It's the bus, it's a shuttle, whatever. If it's one transfer and it's 15 minutes, that's probably not going to deter somebody.
Yeah. So, what I'm hearing here is that, there's the recognition that much of the service that LAVTA provides is not that frequent. I mean, we've got two, very good routes, and then a lot of routes that come much less frequently. That is one of the reasons why, the thought of depending on transfers is a lot less pleasant, I guess. Is pleasant's the wrong word, but a lot less agreeable. Does that sound about right?
Yes. Yeah, one thing that I think you have to take into account on transfers is weather. If it's 105 degrees out, am I going to be willing to stand at a bus stop outdoors that may or may not have shade? And conversely, if it's 30 degrees out, same thing. Am I going to be willing to do that?
Yeah.
And there may be times of the year, well, it's 15 minutes. It doesn't, it's a nice day. It's pleasant. It may be okay.
Yeah, and there's actually is a relationship between weather and how many people decide to ride for that very, very reason. All right. Got two more. How should LAVTA approach directness? Is it providing slower and less direct service with shorter walks, or should we provide faster, more direct service, but expect our passengers to walk longer to bus stops?
How do you define longer?
Up to a quarter mile.
Okay.
The average person does not walk more than half a mile will not walk more than half a mile to a bus stop. They will walk up to a half mile to BART, for instance, but not to a bus stop. All right, we can have the full rainbow here if one of the first answers
Sorry, we do quite a bit of people that have disabilities. They're not going to walk a half mile or a quarter mile, or cannot, or should not. So that's one thing I took into consideration, that not everybody's able-bodied to walk, but some are.
Yeah, I completely agree. And
No, I think, can I just add something really quick?
sure.
I think one of the answers is you really have to know who your ridership is, right? I think for all these questions that I understand that you're asking, you have to be able to understand your ridership to make these questions, for me, to be more something that we can work on and fulfilling and so on.
There is definitely some truth to that, and thankfully, I mean, we do have some information from the previous onboard surveys that help us understand what the percentage of folks are that have disabilities, how many senior riders there are, how many folks are going to school, how many folks are going to work. That helps us, frame some of these super high level. These are super high level, type of trade-off discussions. But then we take what we're seeing here, and we look at, like, how do we apply this to these theoretical questions to the real world. And so that is the follow-on step afterwards. Like, what does this mean in relationship to our market? So, but I also wanted to make sure that this stayed within a reasonable amount of time and not go into in-depth discussion of every question from a market-based perspective. So trying to find an appropriate balance. So much like the previous question is like, how should LAVTA approach bus stop spacing? Serve many stops that makes the service slower, but reduces walking distance, or serves fewer bus stops to speed up service, but increase the walking distance. It's interesting to me that this is, there's also a range of distribution right here. And I expect the past two questions to be very, very similar. Usually the responses are. So, last question. How should LAVTA approach service types? And, is it focus on or improve the local bus network, or focus or improve on commuter bus network?
We don't have computer bus network. Am I missing that? I mean, other than going to BART and back, we don't try to take on things like replacing the Genentech bus or the Google bus or Apple bus. In the past, you've had service up to Walnut Creek, for instance. That is a commuter bus, or San Ramon too. Oh, that bus. Okay. And there's definitely, as a part of previous outreach efforts, have heard a lot about providing service to San Jose or other regional connections, maybe on the 680 or the 580. So fill in the blank, depending on how you make your turn, one way or the other. But these are all things that we've heard in the past. And again, as we look at what's most important, this is much more of a policy question than some of the previous ones were. Where should we, as we look at what the options are for LAVTA as a part of the long range planning process, we're not suggesting we take over Genentech service or Google service or Apple service. I mean, they're going to do what they're going to do. But are there other opportunities that LAVTA should be looking at here for commuter bus services? And it looks like a definite trend toward, or a greater emphasis on improving the local bus network. So with that, are there any, were there any surprises? It's like looking at these results, any surprises, any things that, that really stood out to you? I know we talked about each one of these a little bit already. I don't see any hands raised, so.
I'll just say something. This may be a bit too in the weeds, but part of this would seem like, if your vision or looking long term at ways to use technology and things and try to cut costs so that you can fund these kinds of things that we want, or that I think, there were some pretty clear trends in here that you want to accomplish, without having to, ask yourself, where am I going to go get the funding to implement this? And you may still have to do that, but not to the degree if you're able to capture technology and things that help you be more efficient and therefore save money.
Yeah. All right. I want to, close out and say, where do we go from here? So first of all, I want to say thank you for sharing some of your thoughts. And, some of the questions are definitely hard, or they, cause you to think of like, what is my priority and why is it that way? So I appreciate you all taking the time to think about this and to also voice and describe some of the answers of like why you gave some of the answers here. But where do we go from here? And so the first part is that we're going to update some of the existing conditions that was done in the short range transit plan a couple years ago, with newer demographic information, newer population employment information to form the basis of the long range transit plan. We're also going to have an outreach period where we're going to ask the community as a whole, what are some of the needs within the community? What is your vision for where LAVTA and what types of markets LAVTA should serve, and what some of the needs are within the community that are not being served right now? And then ultimately, with a combination of policy guidance, the needs guidance based on projected future travel demands, and what the public has told us in terms of what some of those priorities are, develop a vision for service that incorporates the technology, the service types, and the frequency and network of how we're going to address, or how we're going to look forward to addressing the mobility challenges, not just today, but in the future as well. So that concludes the formal presentation. And again, I appreciate you all taking the time to make this happen.
Can I just sorry, I've asked a lot of questions today, but just a question. When I first moved to Pleasanton, we had school buses, but my first grader, second grader through fifth grader rode the school bus. And then when LAVTA took over, at least in Pleasanton, we're middle school and high school, and we no longer offer ridership to those lower grades. However, with dedicated school trippers, I wonder if that's an option to build ridership for those youth members, because the pedestrians, mom, dad drop-offs around these elementary schools is insane. I live near one elementary school, and it's such a traffic challenge that, I mean, a fourth grader, I realize maybe every first grader may not be the right choice depending on the individual. Maybe they're riding with their big brother or big sister. But has anybody, and Tamara has great history for this organization, if anybody has any thoughts from staff or from Nelson Nygaard about giving ridership to these younger children on a dedicated school tripper, even if it's a cutaway? Has that been discussed in the last 20 years?
Well, let me start, and if somebody else wants to chime in, but I know of two. I've only seen it twice in two different systems in the United States. In Logan, Utah, which is a very small community, and it was like a very, I'm going to say, conservative community. And I asked about, how do they deal with a busload of, elementary school kids? And it's like, our operator, and the answer I got back was, we know these kids, and we have, our operators have the green light to discipline the kids as necessary as well. And, so it's a smaller, tight-knit community. The other one was Montgomery, Alabama, where I happened to be following a bus that did a school trip. And I was stopped after I was following a bus to see where it went. And there was a security issue associated with it. And I got hung up in it, even though I said, it's like, I'm working for the transit agency. I was like, well, you need to show some ID, and we worry about the security of this. So, but that's the issue really, is like, most folks are willing to let it's pretty common across the United States to have middle school and high school kids riding public transit. But especially some of the younger kids might not be self-aware enough to be, for parents to feel good about that. And that's one of the and there's a liability issue with that as well, for the agency. And, I think it's, like I said, I've seen two examples. I've worked in like close to 60 different systems across the country. Those are the only two that I've seen it with dedicated service. So I know it exists, but it's not common.
I appreciate that. I lived in the country, and so ever since I could step up the steps, I always rode a bus, but I realize it's different in a more suburban, urban area. So, okay, good answer. All right, thanks.
I can tell you all that Michelle rode a bus to get to piano lessons in the 2nd grade into downtown Long Beach, and she is still scarred for life. Remembers every episode. Anyway, that's not going to happen in the Tri-Valley. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I can just share with you lived experience.
Okay, thank you.
I grew up in a system where we rode the buses to school, and the number of operators we would need to run elementary school buses would be prohibitive, not to mention the number of buses. You aren't going to have little ones standing the way we have our older ones standing on buses. The costs, I would think, would be absolutely prohibitive to get. I mean, just speaking for Dublin, I mean, our elementary schools have 1,000 kids in them, some of them, between 800 and 1,000 kids in all of our elementary schools. And we have 8 elementary schools. So just the sheer number of kids, certainly not all of them would ride the bus, but I shudder to think at how many buses we would need and how many operators we would need, all in that short window of time. I can't imagine us going down that road.
It would probably be like herding cats, like you 7-year-olds, sit down. Yeah.
We have that problem with the junior high school students as it is. And I will just share a story. I luckily did not take this call because I wouldn't have responded as nicely as the person who did. But we had a parent who put an elementary school child on the bus. Well, didn't put him on, just let him walk to the bus stop. He got on the bus. And that particular day, his bus stop was closed because the city was doing some repair work. So he'd rung the bell because we're public transit. We're not a school bus. The driver dropped him off at the next stop because he'd rung the bell. And the parents called up furious because their child did not know how to get home from that bus stop and tried to put the blame on our driver, not on the fact that they sent their young child on a bus without any training. So
I will never ask the question.
that was mortifying to me that someone even did that. And I started riding the bus, mind you, at 9. I took the bus to the BART station and took BART to San Francisco and walked to my mom's office. But I was a different type of child. The children in this Tri-Valley are not as street smart.
Thanks.
I rode a bus from 1st grade on, just over the hill in San Leandro. And the younger kids, we would be accompanied by our mother usually in that time. And the bus came and opened the door and on we got and off we went. And I don't feel scarred. I'm more scarred from riding AC Transit into downtown Oakland as a senior for a job.
But back in those days, we also sat in the back of the station wagon with no seat belts.
Yep, that's right.
All right. Good experience. Thank you.
Anyone else care to share? Then shall we move on or summarize, or is that the end of the presentation?
That is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. With that, item 5 is closed. Item 6 notes that our next meeting is November 7th. And item 8 is adjournment.
Great.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, be safe for trick or treat.